will tell us more about the history of Halloween and where and how it all began. Victoria is born into an Irish Catholic family, and so Halloween was part of her culture. And she's also a business owner of Elite Online. And she also teaches people about British history and culture because she believes that it helps people to understand sayings, phrases, and, all these important things that are part of the history. Miss Victoria Taylor, thank you very much for joining us. Good afternoon. How are you today?
That's okay. Good afternoon. You're very welcome. It's nice to speak to you.
It's nice to have you on Voice of Islam with us. To just start off with obviously the first and obvious question, we have looked at very briefly what the background of Halloween is, but from your point of view and from your understanding, where does it all start?
Well, yes, I mean, I've just been listening in actually to the conversation that you've just been having, the discussion, and it's very true that Halloween actually does stem from the Celtic tradition, which found itself populated across Northern Europe, France, Ireland, Scotland, Wales, and England at the time. So before Christianity, pagan festivals were celebrated. The end of the summer was seen as the time when the spirit world, the gap between the spirit world and the world that we live in is very, very thin, and so there is a risk of bad spirits, evil spirits, being able to come back onto earth. So the pagans at the time were very keen to do what they could to sort of drive the spirits away, and so this was sort of the origins of Halloween. They would light bonfires at the end of the summer, and that sort of was what was going on. And then Pope Gregory was in fact the person that nominated November the 1st as All Saints' Day in the Roman Catholic Church. So that then meant that the day before All Saints' Day or All Hallows' Day, hallow is an old English word for saint or holy, All Hallows' Eve, which then became corrupted to Halloween, then actually became incorporated into the Catholic Church. You'll find many examples of the Catholic Church incorporating old traditions, shall we say, into their own festivals, and indeed Halloween is one of these too.
Right. So, during Halloween, we see that so many people around the world buy specifically pumpkins. Why is that? Why do people buy them and carve them?
Well, I mean, I think many people think that Halloween and the whole tradition is actually an American and North American tradition. It, of course, isn't, because, the North Americans are actually quite a new people there. Pumpkins actually are new as well. It was originally turnips that were carved. Again, they were carved and they were lit and they were placed outside houses, again, to ward off the spirits. So it's particularly common, again, in Scotland and Ireland and amongst the Celts. Now, there is an interesting story, a legend in Ireland of the turnip, the lit turnip, known as the Jack-o'-lantern. Jack was a character called Stingy Jack, who invited the devil to drink with him. He didn't pay for his drink, and when he died, God wouldn't let him into heaven, and he was cursed to roam the earth for the end of time with just a piece of hot coal. He then decided to carve out a turnip and put his hot coal in there and have it as a lantern to light his way to eternity. So that's another reason for why we have carved pumpkins, turnips, and we have jack-o'-lantern.
Interesting.
Do you think it's important that because it's something which children all over the world celebrate, and they wear costumes and as you mentioned carve pumpkins? Do you think they should know about the history, and would it change the perception of Halloween? I
had real difficulty hearing you actually at that point. Would you be able to just say it again for me?
So basically, children all over the world celebrate Halloween, and I think most of them do not even know about the history of Halloween. Do you think it's important that they do know about the history, and if they would know, would it change their perception on Halloween?
I think you're asking me whether it's important that people should actually know the history and the background of Halloween, and whether it would actually change their perception in terms of how we celebrate it.
That's what I asked you. Yeah.
I actually do. I think it's really important that we understand our own cultures. All of us, with all cultures, we know where we come from. We know our history. Halloween actually does have a very dark past, people in those days were much more superstitious than we are now. And so I think that's reflected now, where it's seen as a fun time. I actually have my only issue with Halloween myself personally is the commercialisation of it. Right. I find it very, children particularly feel obliged to be involved with Halloween, when in fact they may well come from cultures that just don't want this. I also think that, so there's social things going on there. And I think that maybe if families were more aware of the superstitions around it, the dark spirits walking the earth and that kind of thing, it may actually be something they don't want to be involved in. I think it is important that we do understand our history, because it makes us, who we are. But, I'm also not a killjoy, and, actually people used to dress up in grotesque costumes when they knocked on people's doors doing what we now know as trick-or-treating. They would knock on doors asking for food, and in return they would pray for your dead relatives. This is where the origin of trick-or-treating comes from. They would wear grotesque costumes because the idea was that if you presented yourself as a grotesque in front of a bad spirit, you would actually scare the bad spirit away. So that's kind of where the idea of dressing up and looking horrific comes from itself. So everything that we do is couched within, a Celtic Christian tradition. And I think it's really important that we understand where we come from, because I think that helps us decide, where we want to go to.
Okay. Victoria Taylor, thank you very much for telling us about the history of Halloween today. And thank you very much.
Thank you very much for having me. You're most welcome.
Thank you very much for your call. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
0208 687 7878. That was Victoria Taylor joining us.